Anyway, in fact, we can get into this. This is another story. The pyramid I found, the uncharted pyramid, not on any tourist map, that rivals the size of Chichen Itza.
You found a pyramid.
Yeah.
No one knows about it.
Yes and no. No one ever hears about it. People do know it exists now. And so INA, the international, it's the authorities of Mexico, they're aware of it. But it's not, if you look at any tourist map, it's not on any map. You don't really hear about it. There's only 2 or maybe 3 academic publications on it. A university had studied it only once before. That was my, that was actually my honeymoon. My wife and I had got married in the Yucatan at the site of Uxmal by a Maya shaman it was a traditional Maya wedding ceremony. We did it at the pyramids. We were the first couple to do this there ever. And then our honeymoon, it wasn't hanging out on the beach. You think Anyextee is going to sit around on the beach when we've got ancient mysteries to explore? We unfortunately, my wife, we came together through our interest in Hermeticism and alchemy, so she's already into, this stuff, and she's indigenous, so she really understands indigenous traditions. So we decided to spend our honeymoon, a couple of weeks, going around the Yucatan and Mexico, not just going to the tourist sites and showing up and paying a ticket, but trying to explore. Real explorers looking for obscure and often overlooked sites and really examining them in depth. So we were like going into the jungle. Few people do this. People go to the archaeological sites. You'll see stuff on YouTube, but few actually go and do real explorations. And so I knew somebody that owned a plot of land in Egypt. He had several hectares, and there was word that there was a pyramid in the jungle. So we went to go explore it. We went at night originally. I had I never put this out on YouTube. I need to make the YouTube video. This is like
this is
over
crazy.
10 years ago. I had an artist design. My wife is Lara Croft. Me is Indiana Jones with the dreads in the background. We had the pyramid. It was called Escape. Anyextee and Karina Croft in the Adventures of the Missing Pyramid, subtitle Attack of the Killer Bees. Because when we went there to this pyramid, we actually got attacked by, she did. She got stung multiple times. I had to bring her to the hospital. It was dark. We had to go through first we had to go through a jungle, just us two, no guide, no nothing. And you're going through the jungle, and then, when we get in the direction where we believe the pyramid is, I start hearing noises. It could be wild boar, it could be jaguar. Who knows? Likely not jaguar because there's a lot of people in the area, but maybe we've been there when jaguars have been in the area and they have to hunt them. They're hunting you usually. And so, we get to this massive pyramid, which really what's significant about it, the top of the pyramid, it has a megalithic lintel. The Maya aren't really known for megaliths. They have some big stone, but this is an unusual thing, and it has some unusual rounded masonry, unlike you see elsewhere, contours and such. And it's still, most of it's buried. If you look at it from one angle, you just think it's a giant mound. You wouldn't even know, but it's a 100% legit pyramid that's not fully excavated. And when we get there, we start climbing up, and then the bees come, and we start running out of there, and she freaks out, and she gets stung like, 20, 30 times. And I actually, one of them die and fall off her. I get it. I take a picture of it. I was going to document all this.
Hon, I'm getting a picture.
So
Suck it up.
Well, no, I took the bee because, they followed us. They're chasing us all the way back. And then I forget how we even ended up getting that bee. I don't know if it was in her clothes or I forget but we had the bee because I wanted to show the doctor to be like, is this a killer bee? This is what stung her. Because we didn't know what was going to happen. She got stung and she got very sick right away. She had like a bad allergic reaction. I'm like rushing out of the jungle. I swear it felt like an Indiana Jones adventure. We find this pyramid. We're attacked by killer bees. We go to the car. I rush her to the hospital in Peace Day. She goes overnight. They give her an injection. I show the doctor the bee. He didn't know what to say about it or whatever, but she's supposed to be fine. Yeah, and that was the end of that mission until the next morning when we were talking about it, and she said, let's go back. I was like, all right. So we go back now in daylight earlier, second attempt, and I document the whole thing. I'm filming. I filmed us running away from the bees. The camera was rolling the whole time. None of this is staged. You see it all happens in real time. And then I finally get to the peak of the pyramid. She didn't want to climb all the way up the top. I would say, again, the height rivals Chichen Itza. I don't know the exact dimensions of the height. Again, there isn't much published on this pyramid, but I found a lintel with inscriptions. And before I learned how to read the hieroglyphic language, which I'm still learning, the Maya language. The Maya were really my first. I was going to write a book on the Olmec and the Maya years ago. And so I started studying the Maya language, which is very difficult, very hard to read Maya glyphs.
Why is that?
it's incredibly hard to learn, I think. Egypt is like, if you focus on Egyptian hieroglyphs for 3 months, you're going to learn how to read hieroglyphs.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking, because you,
I don't
you were
know.
able to pick that up, but not Maya.
There's so many more symbols and the placements, and like it was just very difficult for me to comprehend. It took me. I got all the books I was reading. I know some of them. I could go and be like, oh, I know this means this and this is that, but Maya, to read the Maya language is far more difficult, in my opinion, than studying hieroglyphs. But anyway, I did notice a sign that looked like the symbol for Ekbalam and what may be a ruler or a queen. So I took this. Now, you've had Luke. Luke says his mentor is Dr. Ed Barnhart.
Correct.
Before Luke even met Dr. Ed Barnhart, years ago, I had contacted Dr. Ed Barnhart. I mean, this is...
Yeah, he's like the guy.
I know from studying he's a serious Mayanist. He has some alternative ideas of his own, which are reasonable to conjecture. He's been featured on Ancient Aliens, but he's never said anything wild. And now he's in Graham's series. He's a serious source. He studied under Linda Sheely. So this is important in the Maya world. She was an art historian who helped decoding. She's part of the whole movement that forwarded everything in Mayan studies. And so I contacted him. I had been following for years. I knew who all the players were, the academics, who's writing papers, because I was reading everything. I know he was around. He was selling the Maya calendar. He had a website. He did podcasts. So I reached out to him. I knew he knew the language. And he confirmed that these hieroglyphs may be relating to the Queen of Ekbalam, which is a site north of Chichen Itza and Piste, where this pyramid is. So there's a connection. And there may be more to it. This isn't fully worked out. I think there's only one university, Penn State University, if I recall, and there's only been 1 or 2 publications on this site. I didn't know that at the time. And I came back, I'm like, fuck, I discovered a pyramid. This is, it was over a decade ago. I was a little more naive. I discovered a real pyramid. You're not discovering anything new. The authorities know about everything. They've scanned, they know, the locals know where everything is already, and then the authorities know where stuff is. It's difficult to find something new, and maybe little things here and there are buried, yes, but for the most part, they know far more than we know. And so I found out that you don't see it on any map, but I did find, when I dug into it, it did exist. And I posted it on Facebook, and another fellow researcher, hundreds of people like the post. Nobody had ever seen the site. It's just one guy that studies the Maya really well, and he was like, oh, it's Ikil. And I was like, Ikil?
Oh, he knew it.
He knew it. And he was like, yeah, I'm surprised. How would, he was surprised I even went there. And then that's when from there went in and I realized there's a couple of things that were published on it, but few know about this pyramid.
Yeah, the ones I wonder about farther south are the uncharted ones in the Amazon. My buddy Paul Rosalie's been on the podcast 3 times before. He's obviously lived down there for 19 years. And there's urban legend, but also secondhand tales that seem to have legs to them about there being pyramids deep in the Amazon that are protected by the uncontacted tribes that, could have all kinds of implications there. They also might not. They might also just literally be pyramids that these uncontacted tribes are around.
They might not even be pyramids, but they could be terraces or structures too. Sometimes we see a terrace structure and we're like, pyramid. So it's really, how do we define what a pyramid is? Is pyramid really pyramidal? It comes from the Greek word pyramidos, which means fire in the middle. But I've seen images from the Amazon of stone structures, stuff that's out there.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's more that we don't know. It's such, I think there is. For sure, I'm in league with the idea that there might be more that we can find there.
Yeah, Paul talking about this is what gives some credence to it to me, because Paul is like the ultimate skeptic. He thinks all these fucking people talking anything, any conversations like this, he's like, yeah, okay.
My type of guy.
Yeah, he's just like, all right, dude, relax, back it up. So when he's, and he's still like ambiguous about it, like, I don't know. But,
Good attitude.
But it's interesting because the Amazon is so dense, man, and the history there from just like a Mother Nature perspective is insane. But real quick, I just gotta run to the bathroom. When we come back, we gotta talk about this emerald tablet I've been looking at all day, and the Luxor Temple as well. We keep putting that off, so let's get to that. All right, we're back. You were just saying off camera that 15, 20 minutes ago you got off the one story about the cacao. What was going on there?
Yeah.
So let's just fill that in real quick.
Yeah. I seem to go on a tangent. Sorry about that.
All right. No, it was good.
Well, I was telling the story about the time I went to the festival in Northern California. And so as I mentioned, I'd been to Mexico. I would lead tours of Mexico. I've done explorations there, and I could see all these geometric reliefs. When I was at this festival, I stopped at this vendor booth to get cacao, which it comes from the coca bean, and it's like I thought it was gonna be like a cacao milkshake. You know, I thought it was just like I thought I was taking some nutritional drink and everything. Safe with these hippie guys who have a higher consciousness.
Safe with these hippie guys. Bad start.
Well, you know, in truth, it was, you know, I know a lot of people in Northern California, and they do tend to have a higher level of consciousness when it comes to health. You know, so I was just trusting the fact that everything's organic and fresh, and it was. It's just that I don't know how he prepared his cacao, but he did it likely in the traditional way, because there are indigenous traditions that use cacao for vision quests. You know, a lot of people know the ayahuasca or San Pedro, Wachuma, you know, what have you. But cacao can induce mild. You can receive visions from cacao. Apparently, as I have experienced.
Yeah. So what happened?
So I'm drinking this shake, and you know, I thought everything was fine. I thought, you know, and I'm walking around, and literally within minutes, I look up to the sky, and I'm like, oh man, I don't feel good. I feel like I want to pass out, and I start dripping with beads of sweat. And I'm looking at the sky, and I usually don't. I'm not the type of person to get visions like this. But I had these visions, and it started to look like gears turning and like geometrical shapes. And they were very similar to the geometrical shapes that, you know, I see among the Maya and elsewhere to Greek. And I'm like, and then I got really sick, and I ended up vomiting and passing out for a while and woke up, you know. Yeah,
there you go.
Hippie festival. So then it dawned on me after the fact. I was like, fuck, man, I was really sick. I was like, but man, I must have been tripping because the sky just started turning into these geometrical shapes, which remind me of the stuff I've seen in ancient civilizations. And I'm wondering if this is the missing key to why a lot of this, you know, a lot of these principles, thoughts, ideas, symbolic gestures make their way into different cultures around the world, oceans apart. You know, were they all tripping off drugs? Or you know, the thing is, I hesitate to say tripping off drugs because they're supposed to be medicine, right? Yeah. It's plant medicine is a sacred act. And it's supposed to get you, for shaman, they're getting in touch with the divine. They're going within and they're accessing the immaterial world around us, right? Or above or whatever. And so I'm wondering if a lot of these geometric shapes come from certain experiences, perhaps, which then they're expressing, because why do we see it with the Maya? Why do we see it with the Greek? Why do we see it elsewhere? And they're basic, you know, geometrical patterns, your squares, your triangles, and then the different, you know, forms that can come out of that. But at the end of the day, forms, as they align with numbers, again, these are universal principles. They're at the core of everything. We're still using the square to enclose a space. We still, even though you can have different interpretations for a triangle, it's pointing up, it's denoting up, and when it's inverted, it's pointing down. It has a meaning. Yeah, there's multiple meanings of that symbolism. In alchemy, it means something different, you know, but ultimately at the core, it's usually the same thing. Material pointing up to the spiritual, and spiritual coming back down into the material, that eternal cycle. And so, yeah, I just started to wonder if, you know, because it was through indigenous traditions and Western esoteric philosophy and ontology that sometimes it differs from our more scientific, deductive, rationalized Western view of things, if they were receiving the information from the divine, if they were receiving information from Creator, perhaps with the help of plant helpers. You know, because it's the shaman.
I see.
It's the shaman who goes out and eats the mushroom for the first time, trips out, has visions, and comes back and communicates to the tribe to raise the vibration of the tribe, to help the people out. You know what I mean? And so that's, I'm wondering if these visions, you know, these ideas are coming to them. Yeah. Or the other, and I'm not sold on any one idea. The other concept is also like what I was saying before. As humans, we all face the same problems. We're likely going to arrive at the same conclusions. I do this all the time. I think I was the first one to find a parent. I think I invented this idea, or I think I was the first to do this. Then you go on the internet, you're like, oh, I'm going to put out this video on this rare oh, fuck, this guy already did it 3 years ago. You know, like we arrive at the same conclusions.
Yeah. It's amazing that in today's world of over 8 billion people with human history, how even if you said it was shorter than people like to think it is, however long it is, which is a long time, and all the internet connecting us with all these ideas, from the way someone phrases a tweet all the way to research that's existed for thousands of years. Like the idea, no pun intended, that we can continue coming up with new, fresh, and original ideas, to me is something I think about so often, because I'm like, wow, it really is exponential, because you think everything's been done, or most things have been done. Like you still, to your point, you still will think of stuff and you'll be like, oh my God, that's crazy. And then you'll type in what you just thought on Google and it's like, 100 results. And you're right. That does still happen. But like on the other side of it, I'll think of something and I'll be like, that's definitely been done before. And I'll just something random, not anything like a note, but like I'll type it into Google. I'm like, ooh, that's never been said before. Wow. Like it's a crazy thing about shared information today.
Well, that's it. We're all going to be faced with the same challenges and problems, arrive at similar conclusions. And that could be the reason why, you see step pyramids in Egypt and Mexico.
Right.
We know that there are tombs in Mexico for certain. There's no debate on that. Like
we
the tomb
know
of
that?
You got the tomb of Pakal. They have found bodies inside. Whole different story. We have Pakal. Pakal was found, interestingly enough, with jade in his hand, one square cube and one circle. Geometrical shapes, square and circle, squaring the circle. These are Masonic concepts too, by the way. I don't know if you find it, but yeah, so we know when the pyramids are built. Like, I think Billy Carson has stated the pyramids, the Maya and Mesoamericans didn't build the pyramids. They were thousands of years before the aliens and Thoth built them. Not true. We know the pyramids were built by the Maya because of the debris found inside the core structure of the pyramids. When they looking at the ruins of the pyramids, they could find debris that they could actually, you can't radiocarbon date stone, but you can radiocarbon date the organic material inside stone. And we can look at the pottery and be like, oh, we know this is the pottery from a certain period. We know this trash dates back to a certain period. And it all aligns with the preponderance of evidence that would suggest that they did build the pyramids. And then when you look at the big picture, you're like, well, Maya was doing it, and they're using the shape. It's roughly like a triangular shape, trying to reach the heavens or the above. You want to have some dominant, shape to connect. See, when it comes to pyramids as tombs, I think there's something more. It's possible the bodies weren't in there the entire time. That's why we don't find bodies. It's also possible that they were looted. It's also possible that our understanding of a tomb is getting in the way of the ancient Egyptians' understanding of their function for the pyramids. Those stone sarcophaguses or stone boxes may have just been used symbolically or energetically in a way that we don't fully comprehend today to hermetically seal the energy inside. When they found that stone box inside the pyramid, one of the pyramids at Saqqara, not the Djoser pyramid, one next to it, it was still sealed. It had gypsum on it. And when they opened it up, nothing was inside. So if it was looted and they took the body, why would the looters go through the trouble of sealing it back up? So it's quite possible. And why would it be sealed in the first place? To contain the energy that's in there. And they may have been, we're not viewing things in the way like this energy is sacred right here. But for the ancient Egyptians, it was. This is a sacred space. They may have done incantations and rituals, to that box and put things in, take things out, and then sealed it. This is a special sacred thing that we need to function for the afterlife. That is part of the afterlife process. Because you find the same thing in the deeply mysterious Serapeum, which is for a long time, is also Saqqara, which for a long time, alternative historians have tried to make a case for it being the product of a lost civilization.
Can you explain what this is to people?
Yeah, so the Serapeum or Serapeum, depending on which pronunciation you want to go with, is an underground structure at Saqqara that has some passages and some niches, we'll say niches, and in these cavities or niches, enclosures, are boxes. Many of them granite, different types of stone. Most of them are granite, really big boxes. So people make a big deal about this stone. We would say sarcophagi. Some people say, well, I don't want to call them sarcophaguses because we don't know for certain somebody was buried in them. But they're massive. They're bigger than what a human would fit in. They're big. And the polishing techniques are somewhat mysterious because we don't have the techniques of the polishing. And people would make a case for how they moved those big boxes in the first place. How would they have fit? Because in some of the enclosures or I don't want to say niche because it's more than a niche, but the chamber that it's in, there's not a lot of room on the sides for somebody to work and fashion the stone, right? So how did they do it? Well, it can be explained. It's reasonable conjecture. You can check out, when you want to really research and look at both sides unbiasedly, there's alternatives to the alternatives. And there's channels like Science Against Myth or Sacred Geometry Decoded that have made excellent presentations of how they could have actually done it. And people will be like, well, we don't know. We do know, actually. It's just people don't look into the archaeological record. Some fellow researchers of mine, and I have to shout out the Ancient Presence YouTube channel, they actually went and got the French archaeological report from Marriott, who was one of the early Egyptologists that explored the Serapeum. He went there because earlier in history, Strabo, a geographer and historian, he wrote about an avenue of the Sphinxes that's at Saqqara that led into the Serapeum. Okay, and so later Marriott goes there to look for it. The Sphinxes are missing. And we don't know where they are. They're probably still there underground today. Some ground penetrating radar or some testing, or somebody looted them years ago and they're gone. In any event, he stumbles upon the Serapeum, falls into it. But when he goes into it, it appears like it had already been looted before he got there. He finds these giant stone boxes. And then he also finds on the ground we talked about how moving stone, they would use rollers. He found wooden rollers, and it could all be achieved. It's possible that they could have moved the stones. There's no debate about that. In fact, he even demonstrates how he lowered the stone into the chamber using sand hydraulics, where they would, remove pieces of wood with the sand, and it would allow the thing to sink down into place. And that's how he tested it for himself. So moving the stone is no mystery. People will say, oh, well, these are, much older. They're the product of a lost civilization. Well, everything you see today pretty much as a tourist inside the Serapeum is not all that the Serapeum or Serapeum offers. The oldest extent that we know of traces back to the New Kingdom. It was the work of Amenhotep III, who also built the Luxor Temple, we'll talk about in a minute, or commissioned it. Amenhotep was first doing it with wooden boxes, and they were used for the Apis bull. So these weren't human burials, they were Apis or Apis bull burials. What is Apis? It has to do with, the Serapeum is the idea for the Serapeum. Okay, so there's one part of Serapeum that's underground. This is the old New Kingdom part, started by Amenhotep III. They're using wooden boxes. They actually did find the remains, memorial remains, some pieces of cow remains in them. And then, but that is so dilapidated and destroyed, they close it off so people don't get hurt today. It's not really well restored. They only let you see the rest of the Serapeum, which is much later. It's the end of the New Kingdom. And then the Persians dig out a tunnel, Darius digs a tunnel, and then the Greek Ptolemies come in and they expand more of it. And most of the boxes you see are Persians and late Greek. So people try to say this is all, pre-dynastic. No, it's actually very late in Egyptian history. And how do we know? Because if you dig into the archaeological record and you read Marriott's report, we can see how they moved the stone, but also at the Louvre exists these stela, little stone tablets that they took out of the Serapeum that Marriott removed. When you're in the Serapeum, and I've heard other guides explain this to their groups as there's like these little niches. It looks like a U shape, right? Like a niche, a bunch of them on the wall. And I've heard other guides say, oh, that's where they would have put their lights. They would have put light fixtures in there. That's because even those guides aren't reading the Egyptological context. Guides will go to a guide school. They study Egyptology for 2 years. They learn how to read hieroglyphs, and they learn the basics. And then they go out and you're a guide. It's the more advanced. So you can't, this Egyptian guide said it. Right. Yeah, they're an Egyptologist in a sense, but they're not a PhD degree. They haven't dug deeper. And so when you look into the record and you realize that Marriott actually moved the stelas that had fallen on the ground at the time to the Louvre, and in the Louvre, we have the accounts from the Ptolemaic Greeks themselves talking about how long it took to move the stone, how long it took to fashion and carve out the Serapeum. And for many years, alternatives have said this is probably the product of a lost civilization. It's not. We literally have the ancient Egyptians, very late Greek Ptolemaic, ancient Egyptians themselves telling us how long it took to fashion the entrance, to move the box in, and how many people it took, and all the accounts are all there. And not only that, we know who every single mysterious box is attributed to. People make a big deal because they're big, and they say, they're like 70 tons with a lid, another 30 tons, these mysterious 100-ton boxes. They're not. I've had engineers take a look at it. They're likely probably more in the realm of 40 tons. The lid is maybe another 30, so you could say 70 in totality, roughly speaking. And so when we look at this, we have a lot of the pieces already. We already know from the Egyptological record what's going on. It's not old. It's actually very late in Egyptian history. And we even know that they were assigned to certain kings. Each chamber that holds a box was assigned to a king, not for the king to go in, but the king's Apis bull. The bull, the cow, they were venerated in ancient Egypt, even in pre-dynastic times. The big one in Egypt, the big god, was Hathor, from where we get the word Horus, which Horus's name is Het-Heru, which means house of Hathor. Or I'm sorry, Hathor means house of Horus. Het-Hur. Het-Hur is house, Hur is Horus, house of Horus, Het-Hur, which then becomes Hathor in English, and then her son Horus. She was the womb of Horus. Why was she the womb? She was the mother. She was the cosmic principle of nourishment. They believe that the Milky Way, look, Hathor was the one that basically nourished. She was often likened also to Aphrodite by the Greeks. So she, love and magic. And what you got to realize is she was a sacred divine feminine principle. There's different aspects of that. You have Isis or Iset, which represents the magic and the love. You have Sekhmet, which is the warrior and protector, the fierce lioness. It's the untamed female. Then you have the tamed cow, the nourishing, because the cow gives milk and it's about nourishment and fertility. You have Bastet, the cat. They're all aspects of one sacred divine feminine principle. Hathor represents like nourishment in a sense. And so cows, bulls were venerated in ancient Egypt, so much so that the priesthood would look for a specific cow. They call it the Serapeum, which is a Greek name after Serapis, which is a syncretized version of the ancient Egyptian god Osiris. And then also they add Ptah into it, and their god Serapis, which they put together, which comes from the Apis bull. Okay, so this happens. This isn't uncommon. When the Ptolemaic Greeks come in, they syncretize some of the old Egyptian gods with their previous Greek gods to form new concepts to explain these cosmic or natural principles. And so what these boxes are effectively are Apis bull burials. But in the new part of the Serapeum, many of the lids were left on, even though they're looted. They never found a body of a bull inside. But we did find remains in the old Serapeum. There's a little known Isopeum right next to the Serapeum that nobody talks about. It was consecrated to Isis. But we do have some remains from bulls. There's a lot of controversy around this. Long story short, it's not the product of a lost civilization. The stones we know can be moved. We have the Egyptians themselves telling us how long it took to move them, how long it took to fashion everything. And then you have on these tablets that were originally, you can go to the Louvre and look some of them up online even, and you can see, the accounts. And so they were attributed to different pharaohs because each pharaoh was assigned an Apis bull. And the priests would have to go and get a very specific bull. This is what I mean by their understanding differs from ours today. They would have to look for a bull with guess what? A geometric figure, a triangle.
Down.
It has to have a white triangle on its head. Otherwise, it's not down. And so what it represents is the god Ptah, who was the architect of the universe. He was the god of the architects and the masons, the breath of life across the waters. He was the animating principle, Ptah, the fire principle, the initiating principle. And so Ptah would incarnate or manifest in the physical form of a bull if he had that symbol. If the bull had that symbol, it was considered the living manifestation of Ptah. And they would venerate this creature. And eventually they would sacrifice it and make an offering. And it wasn't like a brutal, bloody bloodbath. It was actually, they would take their time. Even today, with some of the ceremonies in the Middle East, like you see, they whisper like prayers into its ears, and they fold the ears over the eyes, and they give it a peaceful death. Basically, it's a ritual killing. And it's not to murder, destroy something. It's a way of one, nourishment for us, and then a way of bloodletting in a sense to give back to the gods. I am giving this bull to you, God Amun or Ptah as an offering. And so the Apis bull specific, and they would fatten these cows, and they would be part of their processions, like the Yopet festival. They would bring all the cows into the Luxor temple to be slaughtered as an offering to Amun. But this cow was a divine. The ones that would have this mark would be a divine creature, and every king had an Apis bull, that was buried. So but then you realize when you're going, there was a transition where they used to do it in wooden sarcophagus to stone. And one pharaoh is basically like, we know it's attributed to this pharaoh because right when you walk in the Serapeum to the left, there's a a lid with hieroglyphs on it and explains how the pharaoh is ordering, the finest stone for the first time, the best of the best. And then that tradition continues on with Darius, the Persians, and then the Greeks after them. And then it stops. And then there's a mystery because there's one of these big stones in the middle of the Serapeum. Everybody's like, why is it in the middle? It's likely it was left behind because it was at the end of because we have it all the way up to Cleopatra. We believe that the last box belonged to Cleopatra, maybe her father. But every one of them is identified with a specific pharaoh. So we know far more than a lot of alternative researchers who cherry pick certain information are actually conveying. The Serapeum is not as old as people think it is. The Serapeum was for Apis bull burials, but there may be more to that process. Maybe they were just put the bull in there for a specific period of time, or even slaughtered the bull in there, and that act was considered sacred. Then took the bull out and put the stone lid on top of it, and that was a sacred act took place here, and we're trying to hermetically seal that energy. Because maybe for them, I'm just throwing stuff out here. Yeah. Maybe for them, that energy helped facilitate the afterlife. I do believe that it's very likely that the ancient Egyptians viewed the pyramids in a sense as a tool to help facilitate with the afterlife process. Now, whether the king stayed in it, entombed in it, I can't say. Same thing, with the Apis bull burials. It could just be to contain some sort of energy. But I do think that bodies were likely interred in these because there's so many.
Right. So that could be at least one thing from it, or the only soul thing.
Yeah.
Gotcha. That was really good. I was mesmerized by a lot of that. But I keep looking at this all day, and we keep putting it off. We got the emerald tablet. I showed it in the first episode. It's very cool. Like, you guys can't really see on camera right here, but it's like when you put it under the light, it's translucent. So what am I looking at here?
What you're looking at, Julian, is a replica of the emerald tablet. You're looking at the emerald tablet. Well, not exactly the emerald tablet, because there is no emerald tablet. We don't even know if a physical emerald tablet ever existed in the first place. So what is this? This is, one, it's written in Phoenician dialect, which reads from right to left. And the reason for that is because around the time that we think the emerald tablet was conceived, this is what the way stone cutters would have likely been using it in that region around the Mediterranean, probably would have been Phoenician dialect if it had existed. And based on several accounts that we have of the emerald tablet, how the glass looked melted and stuff, this was crafted. This was commissioned by an artist. It was sanctioned by the International Alchemy Guild, and originally, it was an operative alchemist, one of the few people that is still performing actual alchemy or has and studied alchemy in Prague, and author Dennis Hauck. If you want to learn about the emerald tablets, you can go to the academic sources, or if you want to get a more easier to understand version, you don't want to dig through all the text, you don't go to Billy Carson. You go to Dennis Hauck. Right. You come to Anyextee.
We had started to talk about this in the first episode and got off it. So that's a good refresher here. But what were Carson's? Carson said there's multiple tablets. Number one. Yeah. Right. And what are the other issues with his claims?
Okay, so let's distinguish. And I was the first person on YouTube to make this distinction and call out I didn't actually call out his name, but I had talked to him at the time. And if you go back, there's a lot of researchers on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok now. They're all saying the same thing, that it came from my original research. I was the first one to publish a video on this almost half a decade ago on the emerald tablets of Thoth the Atlantean priest king versus the emerald tablet. I wanted to make a clear distinction because I was one of the first people taking photos of the emerald tablet online. If you go back and you Google search emerald tablet years ago, I was the only game in town. All the images of the emerald tablet was me. It's my hand holding the tablet in my backyard. And you would see those images in blog articles, thumbnails on YouTube. None of these people have ever reached out and asked me if they could use it. And I don't mind because I don't really care much about ownership mentality. I never got the credit, but I was one of the first ones putting that image out there. But what I noticed is a lot of them were referring to the emerald tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean, when they're using my image. And I'm like, I had already known because I had done the research, as I was confused in the beginning. I had an interest in alchemy and the Hermetic tradition. And so I became in Rosicrucianism, which is an heir to the alchemical tradition. And so I started studying, in fact, at the Rosicrucian Museum, there's an entire alchemy exhibit that goes through the whole alchemical process, all the stages. They've got all these artifacts in there. And they have the emerald tablet replica on display because the emerald tablet is a fascinating and deeply mysterious piece of philosophical, history. It is the basis of the Western esoteric tradition.
Why do we say that?
We say it because it's at the basis of the Hermetic tradition, which gives way to the alchemical tradition and then alchemy, and percolates all the way through the mystery schools to all the way down into the Renaissance, when they start bringing these ideas back out, esoteric ideas, right on down to the turn of the century, when you have like the Golden Dawn and esoteric organizations, into modern day Rosicrucian and Freemasonry. It's come down a long line. Many of the alchemists in the medieval ages referenced the Emerald Tablet. In fact, they had copies of the text. They would hang copies of the text. They would all have the Emerald Tablet. It's so important because it serves as the basis for alchemy and the Hermetic tradition, which basically is the big part of the root of Western esoteric, traditions. And why is it the basis? Because it's not even so much the tablet itself. It's what's on it. It's what it says. In fact, you could probably pull up a translation. There's been many translations. Many scholars throughout antiquity have translated the Emerald Tablet. And so this is good. Dennis William Houck is a good translation. This is more current. I've done one too. I can't transliterate because I don't know how to read Phoenician, but through interpreting the principles, I've done my own translation. But this one is very good, right? It talks about in truth without deceit. So saying this is true. There's several rubrics on here, and each one of them is part of the alchemical stages of alchemy. And that parallels, in a sense, stages of cosmology. I keep using the word cosmology. Some people might not know what that is. Cosmology, study of the universe. It's a story of coming into creation. It's the 1 becomes the 2, into the 3, to the 4, to the 5, to all the way up to the 10, and return to source, right? So how we come into creation. And so the story of the Emerald Tablet, the original Emerald Tablet, there's an Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition. You had asked me what the deal is with Billy Carson. Billy Carson wrote a book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth. I don't know if that's the exact title, but it's about the Emerald Tablet, a compendium to the Emerald Tablets, where Billy Carson claims to have deciphered the ancient texts and writes about them in his book. Well, I've looked at the book. Aside from all the grammatical errors and what appears to be a bunch of cut and paste blog articles, which don't provide any support to his overall thesis. A lot of interesting information. So you read it, and it's like a yes ladder in politics. A yes ladder is when a politician's running, and they're like, are you tired of paying taxes?
Yeah.
Are you tired of not listening to the Julian Dorey podcast? Well, vote, vote for me. And, it's a yes ladder. Well, alternative historians will do the same thing. They'll plant seeds of truth. They'll sprinkle in universal truths, and then it'll be easier to accept an idea after you've gone, yes, this sounds fascinating. Yes, this is what I believe. Yes, this resonates with me. And so there's a lot of information in his book that doesn't actually support the actual thesis. The problems I have, the issues that I take with his work is that it was 2018. I think the book was just published, and he was on a radio show, Jimmy Church radio show, and he said, Sir Isaac Newton translated the Emerald Tablets.
This is where we were in the last episode that we got off. So let's go.
Tablets, plural. And I drew that distinction early on because a lot of people didn't know the difference. Emerald Tablet, Emerald Tablets, what's the Emerald Tablets of Thoth? What is all of this? So let's set the record straight today, okay? The Emerald Tablets of Thoth the Atlantean is a book that came out in the early 20th century. It was written around 1926. It might have got republished a little later. He had to change it. It was by an author named Maurice Doreal, or in some instances, he refers to himself as Dr. Doreal. Although he's not a doctor, he never even got a PhD, barely graduated high school. He said he was a child prodigy, but that's not what his grades reflected. He also said he had been to Egypt, and where the priests in the pyramid, he connected with them about the Emerald Tablet, where they're hiding the Emerald Tablet. But it comes out later, and I had done some extensive research on this. It turns out he'd never been to Egypt. He has no stamps in his passport. His wife or significant other at the time ended up exposing him later and being like, this guy's never been to Egypt.
Hate that?
Oh, yeah.
God, they go bad, don't they?
So we know that Doreal, and more than that, something I can bring to the table, this hasn't really been covered anywhere else. You're going to hear this for the first time on the Julian Dorey podcast.
Another exclusive, baby.
I found in the archives at the Rosicrucian headquarters in San Jose, there's something that was known as the journals. This was for the Rosicrucians will publish a publication known as the Digest, and you don't have to be a member of the order to get the Digest. They're for free. The Rosicrucians make so much literature free online that most of the secrets are out. You just got to look for them. But they had a journal. So this was for members, actual initiated members who are, Rosicrucians. And this journal it's proprietary. It stays within the organization. I'm letting the secrets out. But in the interest of fairness, shout out to my friends at the Rosicrucians, they have now made this available in their library, which is now open to the public, so anyone can gain access to this today. And in those journals, we can look back, and there's actually accounts from Harvey Spencer Lewis, the first imperator, writing commentaries about Dorey, the author of the Emerald Tablets, about how there's been a lot of claims, how there's a guy that's moved to Colorado, and how he is a former Rosicrucian, and how he was high up in the Rosicrucian order, and he's starting his own mystery school. And they refuted everything. Basically, Dorey probably became a Rosicrucian in the beginning, stole a lot of the secrets, ran off to Colorado, maybe to appeal to a bunch of soccer moms, I don't know, like Gaia. And so, more credulous audience. And so, who just want to,
Yeah, I understand what you mean.
Yeah, so basically, he first tells everybody that they got to come to his compound, his mystery school, because the world's going to end, and they'll only be safe with him. And he wrote a bunch of different things, and that time came and passed, nothing happened. He was trying to compete. Dorey was trying to compete with the Rosicrucians, who were a big initiatic esoteric order at that time. He was trying to make his own version of the Rosicrucians. And there's a concept in esoteric traditions known as the Great White Brotherhood. It's much deeper and philosophical. It's like Atlantis.
Sounds a little.
It does. It's terrible because people will think
about that one.
It's like the Ku Klux Klan. That's not what's going on here. Although in some cases, to be fair, there were certainly racist ideologies in Western esoteric traditions.
You don't say. I would have never guessed.
Yeah. Well,
No way.
people were racist at that time.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So, and still are. And in fact, many of us are today. Racism is such an interesting thing because, who really gets to define and draw the line? Like, we all come up in a social construct. I don't consider myself racist. I grew up in a multicultural neighborhood, but I would also say that there's aspects of me because of conditioning and through society that I may be viewing the world based on some of these old ideologies. We get conditioned. And so racism can be very subtle. So you might not, like somebody of another color intentionally, but, there could be things that you do that could be likened to it. Anyway,
I see what you're
whole
saying.
other subject.
Yeah.
So there were these racist ideologies and concepts in esotericism, but it isn't about that. The white light, it's the light and the dark. It's
Yes.
not about race. So although there's been a lot of instances in the Western esoteric space where people tried to say, there's a Aryan or, white progenitors, bearded white men who traveled the earth, and they're the ones who taught everybody about pyramids and seeded the culture. And anyway, so Dorey, Harvey Spencer Lewis, Imperator of the Rosicrucians, writes about Dorey basically being a charlatan. Literally calls him out for the order and is like, and then Dorey finds out about it, writes to the Rosicrucians, oh no, that's not me, it's not me, it was him. And then Harvey Spencer Lewis addresses that. We've known all along that he's defected from an esoteric tradition, tried to create his own tradition, and borrowed the concepts of Western principles in Western esoteric societies and put that into his book, what she calls the Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean Priest King. There are no tablets. It's a book from the 1920s into the 1930s that a man who was trying to create a mystery school and make money off of this created a book called The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, the Atlantean Priest King. And he ties it to Thoth because Thoth is heralded in esoteric tradition because he was the principle of cosmic wisdom. He was Jehuti. He was the god of the scribes, the intelligent one. And so, Dorey would be familiar with the works of Mladen Blavatsky and many others. In fact, there's cases where it looks like he kind of plagiarized some of these works, maybe changed a word or two around a little bit. But for the most part, he's basically lifting knowledge that already exists, principles, putting them into his book, calls the book The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, claims that it came from the priests in Egypt, that they were hiding, those tablets in the pyramid, and none of that.
Fast and loose with the truth.
Fast and loose with the truth. And then he gets called out by the wife, and then the story changes. He channeled it. And then, now they're channeled. Some people will argue, hey, I've read the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. I did too. I read them very early on before I even knew about Dr. Maurice Dorey, whose real name is actually Claude Dawkins.
Oh.
So his name isn't his name. He's not a doctor. He doesn't have the education he
Dorey
claims.
sounds better.
He hasn't. Yeah, well, that's the pen name he wants to go by. We'll respect that. I'm Anyextee. I would appreciate if you refer to me as Anyextee. So, and it's not uncommon in the esoteric tradition to have a pen name,
Right.
We talked about that earlier. Aristotle, a lot of these guys. Anyway, a lot of these apocryphal works are groups of people writing under one school of thought. So I'm not mad at that, the name thing, but there is, the idea that he plagiarized a lot of stuff, took ideas, put them in his book, and then he's claiming that he went to Egypt. He never did. He had to, and there's a whole story to it. Long story short, Billy Carson, who's interested in ancient aliens and sees himself being on the TV show one day, is online, starts his Forbidden Knowledge Instagram page, which I've been following very early since the beginning. Like I said, back in 2014, 15, Billy started coming into our Adept Initiates group on Facebook when it was active. It's kind of defunct now. And so he started seeing a lot of these esoteric ideas and probably came across this stuff. And there were sites like crystallinks.com, which he cites as a source. Crystallinks.com was a site that took a bunch of the work of alternative historians and put it, online. So if you want to learn about anything, it's all there. But a lot of it is not good scholarship. It's just what alternative opinions, basically. And that's where you find information about, the Emerald Tablets of Thoth and stuff. So I think that Billy had likely found information online, didn't do real research, didn't do academic research. I'm willing to bet Carson probably doesn't even know who Homeyard is or who Ruska is. And these are the scholars, the academic scholars. I've never heard him reference these people. And these are the guys that worked on the Emerald Tablet. And so, what he does in his book, it's supposed to be a compendium of the Emerald Tablets, and he claims that Thoth is an alien entity, and that the Emerald Tablets have this stupendous history that goes back 30,000 years, 35,000 BC, and that Thoth built the pyramids and designed the tablets and hid the tablet in the pyramid and then spread other tablets out, and it's all based on Dorey's book. He took the information, which is a sham itself. Yeah. It's not a verifiable source. Not once have I heard Billy Carson actually cite anything from the academic sources, the actual scholars who worked with the original. Well, one, he can't on the Emerald Tablets because there is none. There's no study around the Emerald Tablets of Thoth because it's the figment of the imagination of Dorey. In the interest of fairness, people will read the book and be like, but I read some powerful stuff. I learned a lot from those, as I did, because it has universal principles in there. Dorey took the information from esoteric organizations and put it in his book. So there's good information in there, but the narrative itself is not actually verifiable at all. It didn't exist. I would challenge any viewer right now to go out and find a single written account anywhere in the world that mentions the Emerald Tablets, plural, before 1928. You won't. Because on this planet, there isn't a single reference to Emerald Tablets because it was created by one guy. So that brings us to the actual historical Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition, right? Which is supposed to be a replica of, which is, this is purely speculative. We can't even say it looked like this. It could have been much smaller if it had even existed. We don't even know if they exist. We don't even know if the Hermetic tablet existed.
Yeah, and what would this be based off of then?
This is based off of the texts. So what we do have for evidence of the historical Emerald Tablet of Hermetic tradition is a series of texts. Many of them come out in the medieval times. In Europe, they start getting accounts about the Emerald Tablet from the Arabs in Egypt and so forth, because they were already writing about this stuff, right? Books like the Kitab, the Book of Belinus the Wise. There were a number of writings that came out. A lot of it is rooted in a single book. And the academic authority on this, the academic scholar who first researched this, Homeyard, early, maybe 1921 to 28 somewhere, early 20th century, he found in the, Kitab, Belinus, Hakim. Anyway, it's the Arabic name. Basically, the book was entitled The Book of Belinus the Wise. It gets multiple translations. They make its way into Europe. You have Seville and Philippa. Anyway, you get different scholars going to Spain, and eventually it finds its way all throughout Europe. Different translations of the Emerald Tablet, and the story goes back to this Arabic text. It becomes a book for kings. It is a book. It later becomes rebranded as the Secret Secretorium, or the Book of Secrets, which was part of a book. It's a piece, an appendix, effectively, in a book for advice to kings. And so it's legit. The kings were reading about the Emerald Tablet because of the principles inside in the back of this book. But then along came another researcher in the early 20th century, Ruska. I'm probably slightly mispronouncing his name, Ruska. And what he found is the earliest written account of the Emerald Tablet.
Where was that?
He found it as a recension in another one of these books. He found it in a library. It was like water damage. Nobody was paying attention to these books. And it was like, again, an addition, an appendix, a recension to a book in the back of the book. And the account comes from Sergius of Nablus, which is in Palestine. When I was just in Jordan, I could see it over the water where Nablus was. Sergius of Nablus was like a 5th, 6th century thaumaturgist. He was a healer, a priest, mainly a priest. Let's just say priest. And so he was a priest, and he's writing a commentary about the Emerald Tablet, which he's saying in the story, or what he's saying that comes from Apollonius of Tyana. Tyana is in modern-day Turkey. Apollonius is... We think that it is likely Belinus or Belinus in Arabic. So when they talk about the book of Belinus the Wise, they're referring to Apollonius of Tyana, who was a contemporary with Jesus Christ. He walked the planet performing miracles. He was part of the Therapeutai, learning from the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, the teachings that come out of that about healing by touch.
In the same time frame as Jesus?
He's a contemporary of Jesus, 1st century AD. First century.
Did they know each other?
I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah, anybody's guess. Did Jesus really exist? I don't know. Because I'm just saying, I'm going to get a lot of Christians upset, including my parents. Yeah. Jesus could be an archetypal principle. Jesus could be representing astrotheology. There's a lot of narratives that have come out about that.
I've never heard a good argument, though, about him historically not existing because of all the records we have of him.
I think there's
we don't have his bones, allegedly, but, that's it. Everything else points to...
So what you're saying, Julian, is based on a bunch of stories that people say, historical accounts.
Yeah, now you're going my route.
And in a court of law, that's called hearsay, and it's not good evidence. It's he said, she said.
It's not good evidence. It's not good evidence when there's not a large scale of it. When there's a large scale of it, then it becomes good evidence. That's where I would argue. Because in fairness, if you've listened to me on previous podcasts where we discuss anything related to not just Jesus, but anything that's ancient history, I always talk about how there is the human fallacy of, the whisper down the lane, things change, right? So when you write down records, even 20 years later or something, in a time where there's no internet, no sharing, no able to go back and research it, yes, things change. So I certainly think there's all kinds of holes in particularly the Jesus story. But as a historical figure, I've never heard a good argument for him not historically existing.
So personally, I would lean on the idea that someone named Jesus walked the planet, and that a lot of written accounts were written about him, and that perhaps things got conflated, stories got changed. It's that old game. If I whisper a secret to you, and then you whisper to him, and over time,
85% changes by the 20th.
Now, when you put thousands of years in between that, and you put different agendas, and humans, it all boils down to intentions. What are the intentions of the people writing the stories? All I'm saying is that we cannot, I'm not saying this is what I believe. I'm just saying that, I do believe that it is a fact. We do not have direct conclusive evidence that Jesus actually existed in the context that we read about. What we do have, like you said, is a preponderance of accounts that would suggest he did, which likely did. But hey, when you go to Egypt, there's a whole bunch of stories about the biblical family, Jesus and Mary coming through Tanis, and
I've heard some of these
and
before,
in the caves, and there's stories that the Egyptians tell. For tourism. And it's always been that way. And people tell stories for tourism. You want aliens? I know local Egyptian guides who will tell you aliens. You want a lost civilization? They're not supposed to. They're supposed to stick to the academic paradigm. But, for a little baksheesh or a little bit of money, the pyramids, they could be product of Atlantis. That happens. So and then you go back and you're like, well, this Egyptologist tour guide told me, so it must be true. And then he tells somebody, and then you've got 50 YouTube videos. So now there's a preponderance of evidence. So it must be true.
I see what you're saying.
Man, don't believe anything that was written by a man or woman because it was written by a human, and humans have different intentions.
You are right, and you are literally preaching to the choir on this particular type of subject matter, because I bring this up all the time. The place where I struggle with it is, then do you not believe anything, right? Is everything an unintentional lie? Right? Because stories get changed over time, right? It's not like someone's blatantly trying to do it. And then other people are blatantly trying to change history. It's like history is written by the victors for a reason. I get that. But it gets real complicated, because then you get to, well, what can we even believe about anything with all this stuff? And yeah, I mean, I'm going to, when it comes to any major historical figure, like not just Jesus, but, people who are part of massive culture shifts and stuff like that.
Pythagoras?
Sure, but... yeah, maybe bigger than him, but the burden of proof there is going to be on the people trying to say they didn't exist.
Sure.
For sure. Because there's just way more evidence to say they existed. Now, like my friend Tommy G talks about, he's like, I'd love to know what Jesus was doing between 13 and 31, right? The story's not really there. And there are certainly questions.
Well, there's a story there. The first Imperator Rosicrucian Order, Harvey Spencer Lewis, wrote about the mystical life of Jesus Christ, where, these years in between, how he studied in the ancient Egyptian mystery schools and so forth. The question is, sometimes people can take books like that literally and not understand that things are, it's like the Atlantis problem, right? When it comes to Atlantis, the question is not where is Atlantis, rather what is Atlantis?
Right, yeah.
And so if you're not part of the initiated elite, if you didn't go through the degrees of knowledge, you might assume Atlantis is part of a geographical location, because the way Plato describes Atlantis, so specific detail, using historical places in some events and, to craft this story. But what isn't well known is that Plato, well, one, we do know Plato was an initiate. He himself says he was an initiate of the Egyptian mystery schools, right? Yeah, he does. So he was all the classical Greek authors. We credit the Greeks for architecture and art, but almost all the classics say they got it from the Egyptians.
Right.
And in the case of the Atlantis story, the oldest written account about Atlantis goes all the way back to Plato. He's the first person to write about Atlantis, and he's saying that his elder statesman Solon, a few hundred years before him, hundreds of years have passed already. There's a story that trickles down for hundreds of years. He's saying Solon went to Egypt. There's absolutely no evidence that can substantiate the fact Solon had been to Egypt. We don't know that with certainty. Plato says Solon went to Egypt and went to the temple of Sais, the temple of Aneth, I believe, in Sais, and spoke to the Egyptian priest Sanchis, which is an odd name for an Egyptian. And when you put this into context, people think about Atlantis and Egypt. This is very late in Egyptian history. This is like 25th, 26th dynasty, somewhere around there, where the Nubian pharaohs were ruling, and then Babylonian Syrians come in, and then some local Egyptians in the north and Sais chase them out. And they're the last indigenous Egyptians until the Persians come in, take them over, and then eventually the Greeks come, and you have Alexander the Great in Ptolemaic Egypt. But there was a lot that shifted around. There was a lot of knowledge that came in. And it's quite possible the Atlantis story and the principles contained in the Atlantis story came from out of Egypt. It could be Babylonian. It could be, the ideas have been merged over time, I'm saying. And then the thing is, we don't even know that this event happened. We don't know for certain. We have no proof that Solon went to Egypt other than Plato said so. And Plato said, Solon said. That's double hearsay. He said, she said. Plato said, Solon said, he went to the temple, and this is what it was. What people don't realize about initiates, they may write, it's like a symbol. I could put this, we talked about this, I think, in the other episode, where I could put the symbol of, a bear, the Russian bear, and Uncle Sam, and it's going to mean one thing to a guy flipping burgers at McDonald's and another to a PhD in political sciences. Same thing with writing and concepts. With Atlantis and the esoteric traditions, people have different concepts of Atlantis depending on your degree of understanding. So it's understood in academia that Atlantis is an allegory by Plato. And I do believe that's the case. And in fact, my mentor, the late, great John Anthony West, a lot of people think he believed in Atlantis. He really, not in the way that people assume he did. He would refer to it as the A word, him in shock, because it was like a polite way of not saying Atlantis to piss off the academics who wouldn't take them serious, because the academics won't take Atlantis serious, because the academics believe it's an allegory, not a historical event. And so John Anthony West was also of the same opinion I am, and that is that one, and he's mentioned this, how a lot of these Atlantis hunters are drowning in their own diluted waters trying to chase and look for Atlantis. You would say, Atlantis here, Atlantis there, Atlantis damn near everywhere, because there's a theory for it in Crete. There's a theory for it beyond the Straits of Gibraltar. There's the Richat structure theory. There's Atlantis in the Azores. There's Atlantis, America was Atlantis. You got a theory for every continent when it comes to Atlantis, okay? But when you're looking for a place, you're not going to be looking in the right thing. You're not looking in the right direction. You're chasing a ghost, because Plato was an initiate, and there's good evidence to substantiate the fact that it was very likely around the time that he may have written the Critias and the Timaeus, the dialogues of Plato, that he was actually Sicily or part of Italy, Sicily. Anyway, he was around the Pythagorean mystery schools. And Plato pays homage to Pythagoras before him. And Pythagoras had the Pythagorean mystery schools. And then out of Plato come the Neoplatonic and Platonism, which are also mystery schools. And so when you're writing what I refer, Atlantis is an initiatic narrative. Atlantis is a cosmological metaphor. And it has to do with the music of the spheres and the way that harmonic ratios interact with number.
Music of the spheres.
Music of the spheres was a concept from the Pythagoreans studied the music of the spheres. They believed that there was this sound that the planets made that we can't detect with our ears, and those harmonic ratios correspond to to number. Remember I said number is form, function, and process?
Yes.
Number all music is number. If you learn how to count your bars, if I want to be an MC or a rapper, I need to know how my syllables are going to fall within the bar of the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yep.
1,
2, 3. Yep.
Music is based on, and what is music? Music is vibration. So everything, the metaphysical makeup of man is based on number, which
absolutely
cosmologically comes in a sequence. So this was a way for... and so they kind of talk in codes. Initiatic societies will use words and phrases and say things that only the initiated elite, someone who has gone through the degrees, the candidate who's become an initiate and has developed a wider comprehension, would fully understand. In the same way that a PhD degree doctor, isn't just a nurse assistant. He's going to understand surgery in a way that, a nurse wouldn't, because you're studying and you're learning how to take on multiple perspectives and look at things in different ways, and you're enhancing your understanding of a concept. So when you just throw it out to the general public, the uninitiated, and you talk about Atlantis being a place, you're going to assume Atlantis was a place. Right. But for the initiated elite who knows by the signature symbols that are embedded in the actual narrative, oh, I see that he's using Pythagorean devices. He's using concepts that come out of the Pythagorean mystery schools. If anyone's going to find Atlantis, it's going to be someone who is well acquainted with the mystery schools. That is somebody who studies classical Greek. And moreover, and that's what a lot of it is. A lot of people who study this is like, this was just an allegory. It's going to take also a musicologist.
A musicologist.
A musicologist. And there was one that few people talk about. His name was Ernest McLean. And he was, I think he was a professor actually at a university in New York.
What made him a musicologist?
He went through the degrees of studying music. He was a professor of music he studied music. He might have been a musician himself.
So he's a musicologist.
What is a musicologist? Somebody who studies music.
That's a new term to me.
Oh yeah, well, somebody who studies music theory effectively, right?
All right, so it's not deeper than what I was thinking. There was like a deeper meaning to that than you were leading on.
Well, like an Egyptologist studies Egypt. A musicologist studies music.
Okay. Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.